Well, it's it's a great pleasure to be working again with Bob Armstrong. We were brought together quite a few years ago now. Our paths have gone in different ways in more recent years, but in the late 80s we were brought together for some very important energy work that was being conducted very near here where we're sitting, in Avebury in central Wiltshire. A power site going back many, many thousands of years, and of course where crop circles now manifest in very large numbers. But this period in the late 1980s was seen by many people as a transformational moment, and certain groups were coming together to what we call activate ancient power sites. That sounds a bit almost pretentious, and people think, oh God, this sounds completely crazy. But there's an understanding that when you have an aligned group with a common intention, there's a kind of a heart-centered energy about them. They've come together in service. In our case with Bob, there was wonderful channeled guidance as well, giving us very, very clear instructions at that stage really of what was appropriate to be done on these sites and when, because the astrology had to be very, very accurate. There was guidance that if we did certain work at a certain time in a certain location with specific astrology, that we would see very, very dramatic political and social changes. At that stage, you may remember, in the 1980s, we were seeing the end of Russian communism. And the guidance was, on this first work that I was involved with Bob and the group, was that if we worked on Silbury Hill at midsummer solstice of 1989, the astrology, I seem to remember, was the full moon and the sun, both just above the horizon, and the star Aldebaran had to be directly above. I remember that was the setup, and we had about 3 minutes, I think, assembled on top of the hill to do this particular work, and the result, they said, would be in 6 months' time you would see total transformation in Europe vis-à-vis the old collapsing communist world. And as we saw, the Berlin Wall fell exactly at that time. The Polish shipyards went into riot and revolt. The Eastern European communist countries collapsed like dominoes, one after the other. And in a very short period of time, between 1990 and then even as far as 92, only a couple of years later, we actually witnessed the end of the Soviet Union. So in a very, very small period of time, fantastic changes occurred. Now, no one's claiming anything here, but there was a juxtaposition, let's put it, of energy work at a subtle level and political events that happened. And I think one can place the two together and leave it for people to decide whether human beings collectively do have the ability and power under certain circumstances to alter, let's say, or change or bring in a completely new, well, we could really call it a level of consciousness, because that change in Central Europe was dramatic, and of course was only the beginning of many others. I remember shortly after that working in South Africa on Table Mountain, and many ceremonies with people down there working. Till 1994 we had the amazing election results when apartheid was ended without a drop of blood. These things don't just happen. It's not about male politicians getting together around a table and deciding these things, are going to change. This change comes from another level of consciousness and is the fulfillment of, obviously, the divine plan, the divine will, whatever we like to call it. But it comes from forces that are way beyond most people's understandings. And I think we like to see ourselves in this Wholistic World Vision, which I've been involved in with Bob and set it up with him, as kind of agents, let's say, of other, we could call them higher forces, but non-visible forces that wish to work with humanity to initiate change. And a lot of that change is coming around now through the grid change on the planet. They call it the pentadodecahedron crystal grid system. Some call it the Christ grid, which is a completely new structure of ley lines, of electromagnetic energies and grids that are actually forming on the planet. And once that is in place, we feel by 2012 it's quite likely that that new foundation will be in place, then everything that we have known will change and must change. Put a new foundation in, of course, the new structures will be representing the new consciousness. So we see clearly all around us now corruption exposed. These are the times, evidently, when all truth will be known. All the prophecies of the end times are coming up, when institutions are falling apart, when we're beginning to see through our politicians. Or we could go a long way further down this line, and plenty of so-called conspiracy. We don't really have to most people understand that the world is dramatically changing. But the path that we began together, Bob and I and various others, and Wholistic World Vision and the Spirit Guidance, was Silbury Hill, Midsummer Solstice 1989. I started there because that was where the work began, but very shortly after that, and I personally was only playing what would you call perhaps a minor role in the Silbury affair. There were many other people, and I was actually fairly new myself in the spiritual work at that stage. I only woke up spiritually, one might say, in 1985 in some very extraordinary circumstances in Melbourne, Australia, and that transformed my life entirely. And having moved from London down to Wiltshire completely on a vision, not knowing anybody here, but knowing that I was on some kind of a roll, I find myself actually in the house where we're filming now with one of the great mediums of this country, called Isabel Kingston, with whom I have worked consistently since 1985. I'm now a tenant of hers, temporarily, so it's come full circle. But then Bob, who was also a medium, and connecting with these various people, slowly, of course, brought my own purpose out, and bit by bit it unfolded. So 1989 I was part of the crowd. By 1990, again through guidance, suddenly it was announced that a cross was to be made in Old Jerusalem, and were we interested in being involved in this project and bringing it to raise it on Glastonbury tour at a very specific moment, again astrologically seen by the other side as being a critical moment. And it was very much to do with the idea of the Piscean age, the old age initiated by the Master Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, in the energy centre of Old Jerusalem, where it was meant to take place. In other words, Old Jerusalem has held spiritual importance and dominance in this world, particularly in our Western world, for 2,000 years. It was seen by the other side. I have to say, at that stage I knew nothing about it. It was way beyond my competence to understand these things, but it was seen that that was coming to an end. And that approximately every 2,000 years the energy centre overlighting the planet spiritually shifts from east to west, 30 degrees every 2,000 years. So that the next energy point, which had been, of course, prophesied by many people, William Blake talking about Jerusalem and this wonderful hymn that we all love to sing, and many others who have foreseen the role of Glastonbury, it suddenly became clear to a number of people and supported by Spirit that the energies were going to change. Old Jerusalem, what was beginning to happen in Israel, and Spirit did say at that time, and this is right back to 1990, this energy work must be done now, because in 10 years' time or more, chaos will reign in that part of the world. And they were absolutely right. We can look back now and see how accurate it was. So it was decided that we would go ahead and bring the Aquarian Cross over. Now, the Aquarian Cross was to be given to me in vision. Mahatma Gandhi, who was working with us through Bob at the time, Winston Churchill and various others, and many, many high luminaries, were all part of this process, but nobody described the actual shape of the cross to me. That was to have been my, in a sense, almost first test. I was told, sometime you will have a vision, and I was really quite nervous about it, because being a novice in that stage and beginning to see some of the focus beginning to move in my direction, I was distinctly uncomfortable. But as it happened, in the house that I had bought near this area in Wiltshire, I had made a very beautiful rose garden. I'd been impelled to make it. And in the middle of that rose garden one day I was meditating, and I had a very, very, very clear image of this balanced cross, equal-sided, and in the centre containing the Vesica Piscis. Now I can understand is of course a Grail symbol, because it reminds us that it's in perfect balance that we approach the next dimension. So through the portal of the overlapping circles in the middle of the Vesica Piscis is our pathway into higher consciousness, into oneness, back to oneness, let's put it that way. So it's very profound to realise the significance of this symbol now. At the time, of course, it was just, oh, how exciting, you know, we were all rather like Boy Scouts on parade in those days, Spirit giving us wonderful guidance. We were all very excited, and oh, we're going to Jerusalem, we're going to do this, and we'll go to the pyramids, and raising crosses in Glastonbury. It all sounded wonderful. But I don't think any of us quite understood the extraordinary significance that it actually had, and the incredible overview, of course, that came to us from the spirit realms to assist us into what was really, obviously, our purpose and our blueprint. So that was the origins of the Aquarian Cross, and it was indeed raised on the 21st of April 1990. Subsequently we found a very, very powerful astrological moment, and many wonders and extraordinary things occurred that day, which my book, Rising Out of Chaos, describes in some detail. And then started the work of the Aquarian Cross being taken by myself and the Wholistic World Vision group that we had formed pretty much all over the world, and some very, very, very intense travelling, certainly all through the 90s, and well, I'm still doing it, but not quite with the intensity of before. But the cross was taken to all continents, to many countries. It was honoured and accepted in a most extraordinary way, particularly by indigenous people. It wasn't just going to a lot of white Christians around the world, around the old empire. It was going to Maoris, to Aboriginals, to people in the African jungles, to all sorts of people who couldn't actually communicate in the same language. But once they saw the symbol, they kind of gave the proverbial thumbs up, showed how it fitted their cosmology, their understanding of the present times and everything else, and there was a kind of an acceptance. So it was beautiful how this work actually developed. It was always sort of organic and local. And from that it then moved on, of course, through the New Age movement and whatever else, wherever else platforms were available, and people were told about the story of the Aquarian Cross and the movement to Glastonbury and the focus of what we call the global heart chakra, really now, of the planet opening at southwest England.
I suppose the thing that really sticks in my mind was at a moment when we had a very wet, cold, miserable day. I had my raincoat on. We all went parading up, and it was that sudden break in the clouds and this shaft of light. And the shaft of light wasn't simply over Glastonbury, it was there, Pacific on us for that moment.
Right under the tower.
Yeah. And then that dog started to howl.
That's right.
Which was predicted.
Yes.
I mean, it was just amazing.
It was extraordinary. And we'd walked from Weariall Hill, where we stood under the Holy Thorn of Glastonbury, and that, when you understand the Glastonbury landscape zodiac, you understand that the whole of the area around Glastonbury is the zodiac naturally delineated in the landscape. And this had been seen by a psychic, Catherine Maltwood, long before the days of a helicopter and going to see it from above. And she had known this, and it's been verified since. And what was important about the way Spirit set up this ceremony through Bob was that we were moving from the old Piscean age, and that is where Wiriel Hill and the old thorn, the holy thorn of Glastonbury, which is meant to be from Joseph of Arimathea's Mediterranean staff when he came 2,000 years ago, because he marked this point out. This is not the first time, this is like a follow-up. This was marked by Joseph, the uncle of Jesus Christ, who came after the dramas in the Holy Land and ended his days at Glastonbury, and there's sufficient historical evidence for that. And he brought a staff of Mediterranean thorn, and the whole understanding of the Glastonbury thorn is that he planted that there. And of course, that is Wiriel Hill, which some people say is his actual tomb. But that's in Pisces. Now, Glastonbury Tor is in the Aquarian section of the zodiac. So that morning we were led, and people from all over the world came, not invited, but a big crowd came. We started and we walked about a mile with the cross from Pisces into Aquarius. Then raised the cross at a particular moment, made all the invocations, and in a way it was like the starting of a new dispensation.
And in the sky, after we looked up, there was like the two hands and the blessing. That was incredible too. The clouds had formed in this blessing.
Very beautiful. And clouds do form. We were talking earlier before we started the interview, this one in Sri Lanka, taken in 2003 in February, walking to the top of the spiritual mountain there, Mount Shripada. We'd just finished, we'd raised the Aquarian Cross again, because that's what's done in many of these power centres, and we were just going down and someone said, look, something extraordinary is happening in a cloudless sky. And there suddenly, this amazing cloud formation in the form of the angel of Shripada. So I'm saying about all this energy work, there is definitely a synchronistic interconnection with many dimensional realms that go on. And humans, by their choice, by their purpose, are definitely instrumental in it. It's not as though things are done to us. We are here to be participant in the changes. And in these subtle levels that very few people, I have to say, understand, some people may be very cynical and scoff, we have done enough of it now. I've been at this now for the best part of 20 years, and I could write volumes on the incredible synchronicity from nature that manifests virtually every time some sacred work is done.
She come from Australia,
That's right.
and she went over with her arthritis, put it round, and her fingers were, yes.
She crawled up the tour. We were just going down when she was on her way up, and her whole condition was cured by her faith was so strong in this whole thing. It was extraordinary. And yes, she held the cross on the way as we were coming down, and we didn't really know her story till afterwards. And then, yes, Anthony Roberts, who was one of the great, worked with Robert Kuhn, the American mystic, who I've been very much involved with and still am. He's had a very clear vision of the activation of the power sites around the world, and the whole unfolding of that vision over about a 100-year period, and the order of the sites when they should be activated. He worked very closely with this man in Glastonbury, and says that he probably had the greatest sort of esoteric understanding of the nature of Glastonbury, what it was all about, the great moment that we were enacting at that stage, 21st of April 1990. But the extraordinary thing was that he had actually died. Yes, he died on the tour. I think
6 months before,
six
and
months
then
before.
he suddenly came and he sang part of Jerusalem and disappeared again.
He actually manifested in front of the crowd up there. So he remained a spirit guardian, and of course much spirit was involved in that day. The dimensions, many dimensions were involved, and he was actually part of that. So yes, there were many, many miracles that day, and even as I travel the world, people come up and say, do you know, I was there? And I said, really, how extraordinary. And then they tell me their aspect of what happened on that day, because a lot of things did occur. We were just concerned. I was concerned, of course, with just getting my bit of it done and carrying a cross. Were we going to be mobbed by people, or was the cross going to fall down in the middle of it? Or, you know, all sort of mundane things. You don't realise at the time what you're involved in. But later you do begin to see in a much broader picture the significance of it all and what a fantastic honour and privilege to be involved in such a very subtle and most extraordinary event. The other extraordinary event at that time that was guided by spirit, and we're dealing, as I said, with Mahatma Gandhi, who called Wholistic World Vision his ashram on earth. They're still very much involved. And of course Bob and his partner Loni had attracted the entity Gandhi, very interestingly, when they went to see that amazing film, Gandhi. It's as though he went home with them. And in all this period, I don't believe it is the case now, but in all this period of the initial setting up of Holistic World Vision, Gandhi was in very, very, very close connection. And whenever we had any guidance work, any overlighting, he was always present and always helped us get this established. So one of the bits of guidance before the cross was brought over from Jerusalem, and it's quite a story, that part of it. We haven't time to go into it now, but the going over there, the visiting the pyramids, the Mount of Olives, Mount Sinai, many extraordinary things happened. It is all written, of course, in my book, which is Rising Out of Chaos, which people may be interested in. They can get it from Holistic World Vision. It's been out now quite a long time, so it's available also on the internet. It's described in there. But what was really most extraordinary was that we were to receive a text, and we weren't told exactly what it was, but we didn't quite know how it was going to come. But a very, very important bit of information was going to be restored to humanity at this time. And what transpired was that through a word processor, through Bob Armstrong in trance, they managed to transmit the text in English of what was called the third book of the Apocalypse, which we now understand is the missing part of Revelations. Revelations is in three parts: the judgment of the Jews and the Gentiles, which is actually contained in the back of the Bible. And if you look very carefully at the back, you will see in the last chapter that they bring in various verses which show that the prophecy is at an end. Now that was sleight of hand a long time ago by those who changed the texts, and in fact it managed to remove 7 chapters of what in fact was the prophecy for these times. What people get wrong about the Revelations and try to adapt it to prophecy for now is that in fact it was prophecy related to those times. What is in the Bible now is not about the turn of this millennium. That was taken out for the very simple reason that when you read that text, it is not the kind of text that priests who are about to set up a very controlling and disempowering religion in Rome wanted to have anything to do with. The text of this Revelation 3 is all about the awakening of humanity, the finding of the divine within the Christ consciousness, the liberation of humanity, the end of the suffering. And yet 1700 years ago, when the Church of Rome was invented, and please don't let's get any confusion about this, Jesus Christ didn't bring Christianity. He brought an understanding of the way. And he's been very much misinterpreted ever since, and all kinds of books have come into the Bible that were selected for the fulfillment of mainly political disempowerment and control by a priesthood and politicians. That is the naked truth of 1700 years of Rome and what Christianity has developed into through the Protestantism. And I have to say, at the latest count, 30,000 sects. That is the latest count of Christianity. 30,000 sects in the name of the great being who came in oneness. It speaks for itself. It was as it had to be. I'm not making any judgment or criticism, but let's see it as it is. So this text would not have been available. They say it's in the basement of the Vatican with much else safely locked up, and it hasn't yet come to light in the caves where certainly it is in the Middle East. So the spirit guidance was that it was very necessary to bring in back to humanity the truth of what Second Coming was actually about. Because you have on this planet a growing band of Christian fundamentalists, in fact fundamentalists of every religion, who have completely and totally misunderstood what the initial spiritual initiative and intention was. It is now, in this dualistic world and at the end of this cycle, the exact reverse of what was originally intended. So they have dogmatized and they've taken it to levels of very, very great darkness. And that is as it is. They are, of course, saying that only they will be lifted up, that the earth anyway will be destroyed. It's a very unloving, very uncaring interpretation of what Second Coming is all about. Whereas in fact, this text gives us very clearly that it's nothing to do with any being or entity coming back for us again to falsely project onto. It is about the journey within. It's about finding this consciousness within. It is the path of enlightenment, the path of self-realization, which is the destiny of certain portions of humanity, those who are awake and aware enough and who are headed in that direction. But it is certainly nothing to do with the unloving and uncaring, both for the planet and the vast majority of humanity that the fundamentalists come up with. So this was vital to get back in. It was also important to understand that America is the great superpower of our time, that it is armed to the teeth, that you have fundamentalists in charge of the politics there, that it is an extremely dangerous time as we're now witnessing. And therefore it was important to undermine the spiritual ethos of such leaders who really don't care whether they explode a few nuclear bombs, because they will all say, well, that's all part of the prophecy, we're all going on our way anyway, and we really don't care what's left behind. So it had many, many purposes. Now, I don't say this has been the top seller worldwide instantly. We've put it on the internet. It was freely available straight away. We felt that was our job. We put it into a beautiful text and made it available, took it around the world. It's been translated into German and into Spanish. We have done the best we can with it. But I feel that its purpose is energetic. It was necessary, Spirit felt, that this energy was again connected back with humanity at this very critical time. There had to be a text somewhere that stated clearly what Second Coming really is and what Christ consciousness is. Because this is the time of graduation for those ready from Christianity to Christ consciousness. It's a completely different path. And it's been very deliberately confused by the priests of religion, and the whole background is extremely confusing. So there is a text. It was a great miracle that such a thing should come. It was put onto a word processor. All that was necessary, we had the medium in trance. His partner was with him. All she had to do was to press the printout button. I think it came in three sections, 2 or 3 over a short period. And then we had sessions with the Wholistic World Vision group where again through medium the Spirit of John was channeled, and we had notes that were given to explain the text, so that we've got notes and the text itself. The text itself was absolutely as it came from Spirit. The channeled notes were as direct, I feel, but maybe a little bit of human interpretation, I don't know. I wouldn't vouch so strongly for the notes. They're helpful, but the text is absolutely, we guarantee, original as it came through. And that is part of the miraculous foundation of the Holistic World Vision, the Aquarian Cross and the Revelation 3 text. And it was that I travelled the world with and spoke about to many, many hundreds of thousands of people over 15 years or more, on media, on television, everywhere else. It got quite a wide exposure, and I feel that section of our work is now complete. And those who are interested, because it's rather like throwing seeds out, some germinates and plenty doesn't, we have now drawn together across the whole world those of like mind. We're not a club with a hierarchy with a guru sitting on the top. We are all like-minded people in a very subtle international network of like-minded people who care for the holistic view of life yet who all have their specific purposes to undertake. They all have their spiritual blueprints. So nobody's putting a trip on anybody else. We have common ground, we stay in contact, and Spirit presumably guides the whole process. If people need support here, then we can make it work, and we can maybe bring finance or influence or whatever. We certainly spread a tremendous amount of information on the internet. That's one of our main purposes. We have a very large mailing list and receive all kinds of information. And I have to say that we are not a New Age love and light forum. I mean, I say that rather sarcastically, because that's all very well, but we do understand that the full spectrum now needs to be looked at. We need to be looking at all the aspects. We have very complicated politics going on at the moment. We have all sorts of smoke and mirrors going on with politicians trying to invent wars on terror and blaming certain sections of the public and exacerbating fear and terror. It's an extremely complex area. Some people call it the conspiracy theory world. Well, I have to say the duality itself is a conspiracy from the beginning. There's always one side trying to attack the other. So we have always been in conspiracy. Authority is conspiracy, and always has been. Whenever anybody got together and had an ability to control anybody else, there was your conspiracy. What we're trying to do now, and this is what these people who blame us for being conspiracy theorists, they can't see that they themselves are caught up in the conspiracy. And we are the ones trying as hard as we can to shed a bit of light on what is actually going on. So the ones, rather like David Icke, who's well known and very much maligned, he's done fantastic work in revealing all kinds of other agendas and issues, and they're all perfectly accurate, at least the vast majority are, and yet he is branded a conspiracy theorist. I can be sometimes as well, and yet what we're really doing through very careful research is showing people that they themselves are locked in the conspiracy. They're not seeing the truth. They're believing politicians, they're believing our historians who've written rubbish for the most part. They cannot see the truth. So that's the dichotomy that goes on there. But Holistic World Vision is part of the process of spiritual awakening, let's call it, and let's call it also spiritual re-education. We're moving beyond religions to the spiritual ethos and impulse that initiated all the religions. And it's the only way back. If we're ever going to be a cohesive unit, which is actually what we are in energy, we need to move back into spiritual awareness and consciousness. And that, I believe, is the direction from, anyway, 2012 onwards, which is another subject. But by then, a lot of the old institutions and all the old negativities, the lies that have been believed for so long will crack, and we should be left with a completely new reality for those who continue on the planet. And I mean, you know, that I know nothing about, but there will be a new heaven and a new earth is what they call it. That's part of what my book was called. We called it Rising Out of Chaos, the new heaven and the new earth. So the post-2012 times, Spirit as guided, will be totally different. And they've also said, be flexible. Many, many things will leave your reality, because everything has its onward evolutionary process. We all love our whales and dolphins, we love our bees and butterflies, we love all these things. But much will move on. We're seeing climate change, we're seeing all sorts of things that are going to change flora and fauna. But it's all part of a transition. Other wonderful things will replace them. And we have been asked not to be too inflexible and intransigent in this process. We are to be freely moving, dancing with the steps, doing what we can, what we're guided to, but allowing the process. This is a very, very important point at the moment in times of great, great change, which is frightening for many people. So another aspect of the work that we're very much involved in, that I personally probably like the most, is travelling. I've travelled since aged 4, when I was adopted in Germany, where I was born, in pretty dreadful circumstances in 1947 at the end of the war in a totally bombed out city. And I was adopted by a wealthy Englishman, and my life changed, you know, more than 100% almost overnight. So it's quite a story, and it's part of my autobiographical section in my book Rising Out of Chaos for those interested. But that meant travelling from aged 4, and I've virtually not stopped since. It's obviously a part of my blueprint. I just love the planet. I love all the fascinating interconnections of cultures and of the beauty. I was always interested in geography at school. That was my favourite subject. I still can't understand how people somehow don't know where they are, whether they're facing north, south, east or west, whether they're in this part of the world or, you know, some people haven't a clue about their orientation. And for me, well, it is as it is, but I like to know exactly where I am on this planet. I love every detail. So I was obviously set up for this. And I started in the travel industry. Well, actually, I was a lawyer first and disliked it very much, and then went into what was then the package holiday industry, which was just beginning in the 70s. And I was negotiating all kinds of holiday contracts of hotels and transport and whatever with British Airways and many other large companies. And so I had a fantastic opportunity. It was far better than any university education. I was just handed the keys to the world, and I could literally choose where I wanted to go. Very often first class as well, and lovely hotels. So it's as though I was being invited to connect with the whole planet at that relatively early age. I left the package holiday industry in pretty much disgust after about 15 years, seeing the negative aspects of it, but it had certainly helped me to develop this interest and to be familiar with many parts of the world. Then the part we started this interview with, the sudden extraordinary spiritual awakening in 1985 in Australia, with, again, healers and mediums and all sorts of people that I knew at that stage nothing about, yet trusted, and the whole change in me and the incredible introspection and the dealing with old energy patterns and old ways of looking at things, and a total transformation. And then thinking, well, I'll never get into the travel industry again. I left it really with such a negative feeling, but realizing in life that every aspect is used further on. You know, it's not usually wise to think, oh, well, just completely ignore that section of life. It normally has a germ or two at least that take you to the next stage. So in fact, I was able to use all my skills of organising to bring these, what are now beginning to be quite popular, spiritual pilgrimage journeys. I've explained a little bit about it earlier, saying how humans with a focus and intention on planetary healing, on earth energy work and so on, open and joyful about the process that they're undertaking, who also have a love for nature and the planet, and who blend and meld well together. How, as they come together, they weave what I would call positive consciousness in some very difficult places. I mean, I've been taken into Bosnia in the height of the war. I was in a coach with 40 women trapped between two armies. Rocks were raining in on us, all kinds of things. I mean, we've had the most extraordinary times. The whole point of that particular mission was women linking with women in extremely difficult circumstances, weaving positive consciousness through this battle zone. It's not widely known that it was prophesied by Mother Mary at Medjugorje that a dreadful thing would happen in Yugoslavia. The whole country would break up and that women would actually heal it. And through incredible circumstances, I was involved with groups of women who were part of this. And in Sarajevo for 3 years, under total siege, it was bombarded for 3 to 4 years. You could just be putting the rubbish out and you'd be hit by a sniper. And many, many people were. To live like that. And yet women from all over the world came, had to go under the tunnel, under the runway to come into the centre of the city. And they held for 3 years running a gathering, a focus of energy, mainly quietly, just to start subtly working on that very, very negative and vicious, essentially male, violent energy. And bit by bit by bit, the scene started to change. And in the years afterwards, those women went back and I accompanied them. We went to visit in very, very badly battle-torn zones You can't imagine how people lived there, and yet they would come out, the women, they would have food prepared, we'd have song and dance and whatever, and they said, we are just so overjoyed that others link with us from around the world and take the trouble to come and be with us, because you can't automatically just change a situation, but what you can do is to stand foursquare with people in difficult situations, and that's of immense importance to them, and energetically it's very powerful. I've done that with groups again in the townships of South Africa in very, very difficult and trying situations, in the West Bank, in Israel, not just between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but with the nomads who are in between those battle lines, who nobody's interested in. And there we have had bullets going all around us while we've been delivering clothes and doing everything else. But you know, you move beyond fear. You know that you have a protection, you know your divine blueprint is to be there, and you simply go ahead and do it. You never have a fearful thought. And that is indeed your protection, that's how it works. So the idea of bringing that kind of consciousness in people together and going to acknowledged powerful places, which would all be part of the grid on the planet of where these subtle energies, these ley lines, electromagnetic energies, consciousness lines are anchored. The Stonehenges, the Aveburys. There are so many fabulous and large sites around the world which would act as these anchor points. And by taking an awake and aware group of human beings in a joyful state to these places, synchronistically I would say, not really planned in detail, just allowing the flow, appears to me, as I've said in an earlier part of the interview, with a lot of circumstantial evidence, to be part of the subtle transformation of this energy grid that's being anchored on the planet. So the work has been a long way around answering this particular question, but it's important to set the context, has been taking groups all over the planet to do this kind of work. In summertime, a lot around the Celtic sites in England and crop circles, Scotland and Cornwall. I'm just leaving now very shortly, actually tomorrow, up to the Peak District in the Midlands. A very, very beautiful, intensely beautiful area, sandwiched right in the middle of what became the Industrial Revolution for the world. And there's a thought behind it. Go to those sites, tune in, see what happens, because this country is shifting. Old industrial revolution ideas, old hierarchies, old ideas about empires and commonwealths and all that are quite deeply set in the British people. And all this is going to change. And what I've said all through this interview is change is first on the land, changes on the grids, and everybody building and walking on them also goes through transformation. That's the subtlety behind all this. So in fact it's a very powerful key. But it's not one used with will and a particular purpose. We have ideas about things that may happen, but we don't go and say, we are going to go and sort this out and we are going to change this to that. Absolutely not at all. We open ourselves up, tune in, meditate, dance and sing, or whatever is appropriate, and then clear the site. We actually have no stated purpose, and I think that's very, very important, because otherwise that's manipulation and it's imposition. What we're doing is simply to allow the energies to flow through us, through our open hearts, to connect with all the subtle realms of divas, elementals, and all the energies that work to transform at subtle levels, and leave. We have done the best we can. We have given of our hearts the best that we can. And that is the purpose of what I call heart-centered spiritual geomancy. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it was difficult to describe it, because a lot of people go, get their rods out, we're going to shift this, and that line has to go there, and all this. And that, for me, there's a lot of it about, and okay, you know, it is as it is, but it's not what I'm involved with at all. We are simply working as agents of change, but of change that we don't know about in detail. We've got the overall picture of what is going to happen on this planet and the dramatic changes. This is just one of those cogs working, because it all works together. And crop circles are part of that, all sorts of dimensional beings, and of course a few humans playing around in the crops as well, we have to say, but largely interdimensional connections, devic elementals in the Earth, these incredible plasma balls that are seen and have been photographed circling over fields, and then suddenly the crop goes down. So an intelligence coming in, imposing itself in the most incredibly beautiful mandalas, which all have wisdom and knowledge in it. We're being given amazing quantum science, we're being given all sorts of holographic information, we're being given the most wonderful, detailed information of the new dimensional reality on planet Earth. And the majority of humans are still entirely sceptical, still pretending that it's Doug and Dave with planks and whatever else. I mean, I sympathise with people, of course, because if you don't have a frame of reference spiritually to hang all this on, and luckily we're talking today and we're very blessed to have maybe a little bit more expanded view. We have got a frame of reference, but most people, it has to be said, haven't at all. And the minute anything phenomenal comes in, or inexplicable in grounded, anchored terms, they just refuse to accept. And one can't blame them. I mean, I've spoken to people who say, well, I've been in and I must say, although I say it's people with planks, I can see that something very extraordinary has happened here. But you have to see it from my point of view. I don't know any other reality, and therefore I'm trapped. I can only say that it must be man-made. And that's very important to understand. So we mustn't be judgmental of people who are not quite getting it yet. Many are. The young ones are coming in with very different brain structures, with more lateral thinking. They're not fazed by any of this. They sort of walk more naturally into it. I mean, I'm coming up to 60 now, and you know, we're getting on, some of us, and it's the older generations who have a lot of difficulty in adapting and changing. But this is all part of the geomantic changes that are going on. Crop circles, I think, are a very important part because they come in to the very specific energy points around here, like the famous sites. They're clustered all around White Horses, Avebury, Silbury, Stonehenge, all the well-known places. It's almost like acupuncture points into the planet. I think it serves many purposes, but probably there's an activation going on, and like a part of the new grid being established. I think they're part of that as well.
It must be something to do with the heart chakra as
well. That's very important here in the southwest of England, where we understand, and it's part of the Robert Kuhn vision, and I believe you'll show a little chart with this programme where the different chakra centres of the planet, seen really as a human body mirror, where some people feel they're located. Again, let's fight about it. We could start another world war over who's got the heart and who's got the head and who's got the tail and all the rest of it. Let's get into that. But there is a general consensus that there are certain areas of the world that represent certain qualities of the different chakras. And it has for a long time been understood here that the southwest of England and Wessex is the global heart chakra of Gaia. And for me, that is the key to why crop circles are here. You see, many people ask that question because we have at least 90% of them for the world. And if you've listened to this interview and understood really anything of what I've said, of the bringing of the Aquarian Cross to this area, guided by spirit, of the indigenous shamans all around the world who come here, and I've been privileged to take them to the sites, quite a few of them, and they've all said there is something incredibly special about this region of the world now. Through Isabel Kingston's guidance we have, because I've often asked Spirit, they've said it was designated eons ago that this particular zone of the planet in this particular time would have a significance. In the physical world, there have to be these places. And they're not always the same place. You can't go on with an old Jerusalem forevermore because it's falling apart and there are horrors there at the moment. A new dispensation comes to new geographical location, and let's call it a new Jerusalem, not based at all on the third dimension and a physical city being built. Nothing to do with that. That's what Blake was talking about. It's a higher ethereal consciousness. That is the new Jerusalem. So all these things are gradually falling into place, bit by bit, like a jigsaw puzzle. And those of us who are passionate about the planet and working in this way are led to very wonderful journeys. We talked a little bit earlier about the Cathars. I lead a journey every autumn, it always seems to be early October, down to southwest France, to the area of the Cathars, who were a group of people, actually quite a large number, who very, very strongly opposed the corruption in Rome. And actually on that subject I've only just read a few articles where some man has put a book together called The Criminal History of the Papacy. And that, I thought I knew a lot about that organisation. But this has taken the veils away completely, and this was all through the Middle Ages. And the incredible corruption of virtually every single, and I have to say extremely dark entity that was ever a pope, is there. And in the middle of all that came the Cathar Renaissance. And in fact, if the Roman Church hadn't destroyed them so viciously and so thoroughly, in 13th century northern Italy and southern France, the Renaissance would actually have started spiritually. But this was so suppressed and so heavily destroyed that it was later in northern Italy that it started culturally, a good 100, 200 years later. But the spiritual ethos for the Renaissance was actually that Cathar consciousness. These were the times of courtly love, of the troubadours in southwest France. Imagine such a thing. For me, these are like kamikaze pilots coming into this dimension, knowing there's absolutely no hope for them, that they're going to be destroyed because their energies are so fine, so way ahead of their times. And then the barbarous hordes come in and destroy them within duality, which is exactly what happened. So we take people down because many people feel a connection with those people. Maybe they weren't Cathars, maybe in other lives, but they have perhaps been in groups that have suffered for holding the light, as we might call it. Because make no mistake, there have always been groups in these last 2,000 years since the mission of Jesus Christ who have held what we call the higher light consciousness. Always against authority. And that's where we go back to the conspiracies. Authority has always conducted conspiracies. And those that have tried to hold the light and the truth have always been targeted and identified, and usually viciously destroyed. That's been the outworking of duality on this planet. And I suppose there are souls that have come back maybe time and again, or however reincarnation works. I don't think it's so exactly precise, but I think energies connect with certain undertakings of maybe groups of people who've tried to hold specific frequencies of consciousness, something like that. I mean, it's a complex matter. But they are drawn, and we find a lot of people are drawn back to that area. And when they go there, they do go through great changes. It's part of what the Power Site tours are about. Certain people come to certain areas, and just by gently introducing them to the land and allowing them to tune in, they go through very profound changes. There are people who write to me now, years later, and say that trip to X, Y, or Z was the transformation for me. Now, it's nothing I've done. All I've done is use my old British Airways skills in phoning a few coach companies and a few hotels, and I've got a bit of an idea of the background, but I'm not taking any praise for any of this at all. I facilitate an opportunity for people to connect back into something very, very deep and personal, and on the strength of that they move on to other levels. So for me, out in nature, out in the open, working with natural forces is the most beautiful way for me to work. Ideally, I would not wish to be inside a room as we are today. I know today we'd planned, if the weather had been better, we'd actually be out at Avebury, but it so happens that it's pouring with rain, so we're not. But my ideal is always to be outside and allowing people those very precious moments in an ever crazier world to be still and to feel the pulse of the earth and to be really integrated with nature. It's people look after a day out with me and say, that was the most amazing thing imaginable. I say, well, you can do it any time. Switch the telly off. Just go to your local woods. We sat once in the bluebells near here, which are very famous worldwide, 80 acres of bluebells. The afternoon workshop after morning here at the house was to go and sit quietly for an hour and a half in the bluebells. Very simple. People absolutely loved it. They said, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened. Well, get on with it, you know. And people say again when I travel, oh, we must do this again. You know, when are you coming back to South Africa? I said, it's got nothing to do with me. When are you going to do it again? You know, this is what's important, to bring people back to the understanding that we've all got it. It's part of all of us, and that we can all get incredible healing and peace and inner stillness simply by our reconnection with nature. And it's vital now because we're destroying this planet at such a rate and so many things are changing, that to find those oases of peace and calm are incredibly important, and you know, we need to pay attention to that. We're also going to go through to Sri Lanka. I go every year actually to India and Sri Lanka, and we have a peace conference there in February 2008 where there'll be world religious leaders, liberal world religious leaders. Obviously the orthodox ones would never contemplate it, but the liberal ones who will join in debate to bring in the understanding of spiritual unity beyond religions. Because it is indeed from spirit that religions originated, and the great masters who brought the religions were giving pure spiritual teachings. What man, politicians and priests have done to it can be seen today. So there are those of us who understand that getting back to square one is really what's necessary. So Sri Lanka has always been connected with a deity called Murugan. Some call him Sanat Kumara. It's an androgynous energy. It's not a male or female, but it is an overlighting deity of the, as it were, we could call it the cosmic human soul in a sense. It is an all-embracing energy that's been worshipped in a holy city called Katragama, which has always been open to all the religions to worship. And we have felt that this is a very suitable venue, particularly in all the troubles in Sri Lanka now in that part of the world, to draw people to have time to understand our common spiritual heritage and the essential oneness. So in February 2008 we'll conduct that, and it'll be part of energy tours being run in India. Robert Kuhn, who I mentioned, had indicated that a triangle of energy sites would be activated over the last 6 years, culminating in 2008, which will be the Narmada River in India, about halfway up, the sacred Narmada, Mount Arunachala near Madras, which is where the great sage Ramana Maharshi sat all his life and gave these blissful non-duality Advaita teachings, and Shripada, Adam's Peak in Sri Lanka, which we climbed, and I showed you that beautiful picture of the cloud. Those 3 points of a triangle were to be connected, and the astrology is very specific about this, and we are completing the work of the last 6 years, visiting them next year in combination with this conference. So there's a great emphasis on the transformation of the subcontinent. India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all this area of great confusion, of religious confusion and so on. There's a great shift, and part of this work and the conference is to do with that. And Robert says after that the emphasis goes to Tehran, the great mountain behind Tehran, Mount Damavend, and that the next cycle will be a great deal to do with the resolution of the whole Islamic question. That's, in a way, sorting the religion out, because of course there are the high aspects of Islam and there are the extremely low, just as there are in Christianity. But that's going to be a very important focus after 2008. And we've been looking at this vision of his since the mid-1960s. And it's pretty clear that Tehran and Iran are the centre now. Even America and Israel and Britain and so on daren't, anyway at the moment, fingers crossed, launch an attack on them. There's something immensely powerful about that old Sufi region and the ancient spirituality of this noble and ancient place and empire that will not just be pushed over. So his prophecy was very, very accurate, and so after 2008 the energies change. We start working with different sets of energy points as the fulfillment of the program. So we fast forward now, not very far actually, to the year 2012, which of course many people are now discussing, and there are a whole ream of different theories about what's going to happen at that time. One thing I've always pointed out is that we here in duality as a human race seem to disagree about just about everything, and we've all got so many different theories and whatever else. But one thing about 2012 is that it is a consensus point of view of all the major religions and all the shamanic and indigenous peoples that I have met, that is indeed a very critical shift point, we could call it. So we have leading the whole story the Mayan calendar. The Mayans obviously had a great understanding of the cosmos, great abilities to measure, amazing astrology, and they could see that a lot of subtle changes would take place and that our planet would be obviously at a certain place in the universe at this time because they'd calibrated it all. It's all to do, I think, with the precession of the equinoxes, which is a 26,000-year circumambulation of the whole solar system, which we seem to be about to complete. At this time, we are aligning with the centre of the Milky Way galaxy. Certain of the planets in our solar system are already going through it. I'm not an astrologer, but I do read about it. So we're already in it. We're already in the run-up. And as it all shifts, we come into this central alignment with the core of the Milky Way galaxy. That's really the essence of it. And it is thought that out of that comes energy, frequencies, a ray, or I really haven't a clue myself what it is, and I don't think many people honestly have. There's an instinct that something very transformational will occur, both before and after that particular date. Now, there's a lot of argument about whether that date is accurate. There are pro and against schools of thought. It's typical here in a dualistic world of humans using their brains. Everybody seems to pull in different directions. But overall, around that period, yes, is what I would say, big shifts and transformations. Spirit guidance has come through and said, you humans really, you take things so rigidly and so dogmatically as well. You all seem to think that on the morning of the 22nd of December 2012, everything overnight will have changed. It's really, get real, is their message. It will be a process. But with time collapsing, as has now been demonstrated, with the movement away from this fixed time-space preoccupation that we have, because really it's only an illusion of the third dimension. All is one, all is now. Think Mars, you are Mars. It's the speed of thought. It's not even the speed of light. It's the speed of thought, and thought is instantaneous. That brings the whole universe and everything we know down into manageable proportions. Things are not 100,000 light years away. They're there. And in our dreams, no doubt, that's where we travel, instantly. So, the beginning of the breakdown of time and space, and actually the theme of the crop circles last year were what was called the wormhole. We had 4 sections, which is a scientific term, which actually is the vehicle for moving between time and space and into other dimensions. And that was actually laid out in the fields. Isabel Kingston here in this house had predicted that by 2006 we'd be shown the key to interdimensional travel. There it was, actually in the fields, the wormholes. And so 2012, all about these changes. Now, I've no idea, and I don't think anybody has, exactly how it's going to manifest. It's obviously we move towards the Aquarian age. I wouldn't say yet we're out of Pisces. Everybody I see is still pretty Piscean. We're pretty heavy and dense, water-clogged kind of bodies. We're still very dualistic. A few of us are trying to speak in these ways, but most of us say this is a load of rubbish and we should all be locked up and everything else. It's, for me, still a very, very, very Piscean world. We can see the bright light of Aquarius on the horizon, but I honestly don't think we're there yet. But we're aiming that way. And that will be a time of complete change. It'll be a time where the human race, I feel, will actually look different. I think even the younger generations are beginning to look different now. They're beginning to look, when they're not obese anyway, much more androgynous. We're not having the extreme polarizations going on between male and female. They're much, much freer and more flexible in the way they look, in the way they act and behave, I mean in sexuality, in all kinds of ways. There's a much, much less defined sort of polarity going on. And I believe that will continue more and more at this time. The bodies themselves will change. We won't be so water and densely based, with much more air-centered, much, much lighter. We will be able to use mind properly. We only use a tiny portion of the brain, they say about 70% at the moment. But we've got the left and right brain hemisphere. We've got the prefrontal cortex, which is growing like horns, which is where consciousness develops. We've got the reptilian back brain. And we've all got our reptilian aspects of fear and control, and there are some portions of humanity. I don't have to go into a full rave here on the conspiracy level, but we can see around us how forces in the world see no other reality for our greater good, apparently, than total control. That comes from the old reptilian back brain, and they're still stuck in it. So the whole of this vehicle is beginning to blend, to balance, and to meld. And when we can use it all properly, in total balance, then we shall quite simply be able to manifest our thoughts. How did they build the pyramids? How did they manipulate vast stones in those so-called uncivilized olden days? Well, it was with vibration, with sound, and with thought. That's how it happened. And don't think that everybody years back were all useless kind of, cavemen, going around with cudgels bashing each other on the head. We've had the most fantastically evolved civilizations on this planet. I was in Ica in south of Peru, going up to see the Nazca lines, and when we'd done that, they were impressive. We were taken to a museum where tablets of stone that are Mesozoic, 350 million years old they're dated, with the most beautiful engravings on them of an advanced civilization that was on the planet at that time of humanoids. From those illustrations you could see science, you could see medical work, all kinds of things, 11,000 of them, that are way beyond where we are now. So we need to give up those ideas that anybody who came before us were absolutely imbecilic and running around with cudgels and banging each other on the head. It was nothing to do with that, nothing whatever. We've had great civilizations on this planet. I feel that this planet is a nursery of consciousness. That's how I like to see her. She invites star seeds to come here, and many people are now saying, even scientists, that our origins are from elsewhere, to incarnate on this planet and go through all the stages of duality that we've been talking about today, and to evolve, and then at such a point as we come to in 2012, move off again, because many will move off and move on in this expanded consciousness at many different dimensional levels. This is a very, very small, tiny little pot, really, that we're all crammed into. There's far, far more out there than most people can possibly understand. And so this planet, beautiful planet, is the third dimensional, where we learn a great deal of lessons and experiences, and we come, very often, I'm afraid, probably destroy a great deal, and the mother is kind to the children. She'll slap them a bit, but they treat her pretty badly very often. But with her great love and compassion, she will look after them. But there will come a moment, perhaps, when the final slap does come, and we've overstepped the mark. And I think various civilizations have done that. And then the mother needs time to rest again. And there have been times on the planet when the oceans have boiled, when it's obviously been very, very, well, it's been impossible for human life, certainly, to exist here, or in minute form. And then a new civilization has sprung forward. So I see this process, and these times will also bring up sites from those old days, from Atlantis, from Bimini, from land rising and falling, which is what's going to happen. And we are actually going to be given evidence of extremely ancient and evolved and advanced civilizations. So 2012 is really a gateway over that period of time for great changes and transformations to take place here. All we can do, in a sense, is think about that, see it as detached, I like to say surrendered observers, if we possibly can. My understanding in philosophy is that we are on a life blueprint, each one of us. Our life, rather as Shakespeare said, we are simply actors on the stage, and that our lives unfold. After all, you have astrology, you have numerology, you have all kinds of techniques and ability to read a life, and I've had many done and they've been extremely accurate. So at one level, things are known. And so there is an unfolding of our life purpose here, and although we will be able to see many other things happening, they're not directly to do with us. They're not directly our path. Many of us would love to drop everything perhaps and go out and help in Iraq and nurse all those sad, poor people, but it's not on our blueprints. Certain people have it on their blueprints. So we are observing all these other things. And if we can keep ourselves as emotionally balanced as we can, and certainly as non-judgmental as possible, that's a really important one, because the ego tends to judge very, very quickly. And how many times have we judged a situation, then a few days later have found that we got it completely wrong and it was a most inappropriate judgment to make. We're simply, as the great scriptures tell us, not to judge. Much better to see it is as it is. It unfolds as it needs to be. And to stand back and observe the process in a sort of detached way until, again, we're called onto the stage. And when we're called onto the stage, we fulfill our role by divine decree, and nothing will interfere with it. That is our purpose. But when we're not doing that, we observe the world. We send love from the heart. Certainly we meditate together. We can do many things that are very, very helpful to change the vibration. But we have our specific roles. And as we move towards 2012, such extraordinary changes are already happening, and even more extraordinary ones will happen. We're, I think, going to have to cultivate this detachment to quite a large degree. Surrender, acceptance, observation. And try to see things as they really, truly are. This is a very smoke and mirrors world. You're given stuff on the media which is almost certainly incorrect. In fact, if you looked at 180 degrees on the other side, you might begin to come to truth. It's that time when things are so convoluted. So our only real challenge is to try to get to the truth of what is actually happening. Not to disturb ourselves, but to see things as they truly are. Then we'll be led through these times in a joyful way, I feel. I don't think it's a fearful process at all. But I do think we need to see very clearly in this extremely complicated world now unravelling and falling apart exactly what is going on. Certainly I spend a lot of time trying to help people find that, despite a lot of antagonism. People don't like to have these realities pointed out. They don't want to change their old conservative ways of thinking, but in these times we're going to have to let go of a lot, if not everything.